Welcome back to The Outward Effect, a podcast in which unique perspectives challenge us to be better versions of ourselves. We're two ambitious women who talk about how we like to stretch our creativity and work on self growth to become better people. I'm Shelley.
And I'm Tempsy.
And today we wanted to talk a little bit about an experience that Tempsy had recently. So this, I think, may be related to the topic of racism. So we just wanted to throw that out there in case any of you might be sensitive to that topic. We won't be talking about the history of it or anything like that, but more so like personal experiences that Tempsy and or myself have maybe come in contact with throughout our life. So just wanted to give you a heads up about the topic before we get into it. Nothing too crazy. I feel like, in this particular episode, it doesn't get too deep because neither of us have had very like in-depth or it hasn't been, really aggressive, but perhaps a little bit off-putting or something, to be a little bit more aware about. And, I think that this ties nicely with what our podcast is about because it is basically, perspectives that we're talking about with things that we've experienced. So I'm going to turn it over to Tempsy because she's had something recent, more recent than myself anyway, in regards to this topic.
Yeah, so most of you know that I just moved to Las Vegas a few months ago. And when you move, you have to find new people to go to for certain things, like getting your hair cut, for instance. And my husband found a barber really close by. So we decided to go. And they had proper precautions set up for preventing transmission of COVID. So we decided to go. And as soon as we walked in, it was kind of like the decor was kind of like a saloon in some sort of like Western movie that you might have seen back in the day. But it was decorated nicely. It just was, you could tell they were trying to make it look like a lodge or a saloon of some sort. And as soon as we walked in, I don't know, everybody seemed to get a little bit quiet. Like we could feel a bit of a vibe as soon as we walked in, but we just kind of ignored it. And then the hairdresser said, "Oh, I need to get the kids' booster seat." And so I went and got it for her because she had pointed to it. So I was just trying to help her out. And so I went and grabbed it. And she's like, "You didn't have to get that. I was going to get it." And I was like, "Okay, sorry." Whatever. I just said, "Oh, I was just trying to help you out. No worries." And so she set it up. And then she started cutting my son's hair. And then this other lady had finished with her client, and she kind of was cleaning up. And my husband, he kind of whispered or mouthed to me, maybe I should see if she's available to do my hair. And I think she saw him, and she goes, "No, I'm busy today. You're going to have to stick with her." Like kind of snotty, And I was like, okay, maybe she's in a bad mood. So I'm going to just move on. But she was like chilling, eating a little bit.
You're kind of like, were you really busy? It doesn't really look like you have another appointment on your stack today, right? There's
Right.
probably another way she could have said that, like, oh, I don't know what my schedule is or something like that. Let me check it. Oh, I have someone coming in like, 15 minutes or something. I don't think I'll have enough time for you, whatever, right?
Right.
But how did you find this place? Like, was it like a Yelp search? What were you looking for in general up front when you were trying to find somewhere to get a haircut?
Well, my husband had been looking for a place to go for a while, and he was kind of he definitely was looking on Yelp, and I'm pretty sure that's where he found them. And he's looking obviously for people with good reviews, people with decent pricing, and folks who had COVID precautions in place. Like that was the criteria that he was really looking for. So that's how we found it. But yeah, I was like, that could have been said a little bit nicer, but I'm just gonna move on. And I was surprised she even knew what he was asking me because I couldn't even understand what he had been asking me because he was mouthing it. And I was like, what?
And it's kind of like, I think that's interesting because that's like she was paying really close attention. Like, if you two are looking at each other, he was clearly trying to communicate something to you,
Right.
to your face, right? And she's like on the side somewhere. She's not even a part of like your actual conversation going on, right?
Exactly. And, the lady that was cutting my son's hair, she was kind of like, she wasn't rude to him, but she was a little bit stern with him. Most people are like, "Oh, you're so cute," or, "Oh, hold still, hun," or, something like that, where she just was a little bit more stern with him, which is totally fine. Everybody has their own, way of talking to their clients. So I didn't really think too much of that, but my husband brought it up. But then when my son was all done, I took him outside to take him for a walk, and we it was kind of cold, so we sat in the car, and my husband came outside, and he got in the car and he was like, "That was really weird." I was like, "Yeah, I got a weird vibe in there." He's like, "No, you have no idea." And I was
Like after you left, it got weirder.
yeah, and I was like, "What?" And he was like, when we had walked in, there was some politics discussions going on as well. So apparently, after I left, the lady that was cutting his hair, who had just finished with my son, had started talking politics. In this case, she was a supporter of the Trump administration. And this is right before the election, the election was kind of in play. And she was like, if Trump doesn't stay in office, but the Biden administration, they're going to take all of our guns away. We're not going to be able to have any, guns. I have mine right here in my purse. And I was just like, whew. She said, what? I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of people in Las Vegas, they are carrying a concealed weapon. It's kind of a thing here. There's a lot of shooting ranges and people, have guns here, but nobody really as far as I know, nobody really talks about it unless,
Like comes out and tells you,
yeah,
by the way. Yeah.
exactly. And so, my husband just was like chatting with her a little bit, and she's like, yeah, and if Biden comes into office, then, he's going to be working with the Chinese and all the Asians or something to that effect. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah. And at that point, he stopped talking.
So let's rewind a little bit in case we have some newer listeners, so how would you describe your husband?
My husband is Chinese and Vietnamese. And
Just to kind of let people know, like, why would he be like, why are you telling me this? Like, okay, here I am sitting getting my haircut. Why are you bringing in,
yeah,
saying Chinese, right? Yeah.
exactly. And I don't know, it was just crazy. And when he told me that, I was in complete shock. And then he said, I didn't respond after that. But then she says, like, not you, though, to my husband. And I was like, so she's like backtracking now, She knew
Yeah.
she stuck her foot in it and she's kind of backtracking. And he just stayed quiet, and it was super awkward after that, he said, and he didn't even like his haircut. So he had to pay an additional like $35 to go to somebody else. But this place was way better anyway, and it was all Asian folks working there. So he but it was just crazy. I was shocked. I couldn't, in all honesty, going in there, I felt the vibe, but I didn't think anything of it, really at first, until the one lady was like, I can't take you. You're going to have to wait for her. And then I was like, okay, this is getting really weird. But, when he was telling me the rest of the story in the car, I got really disappointed because, I have not personally experienced a whole lot of racism. Growing up, the town that I grew up in was predominantly white people, but we had other ethnicities living in the town. And it was a little bit smaller. Like if you're driving kitty corner across my town, it would take you max 15 minutes. But I lived right next door to an Asian family, and that they had a kid, and he was like my best friend. And I went over there almost every day. He came over to my house all the time. And, I don't know, it just never really occurred to me. I wasn't brought up to have any sort of disposition towards anybody, just to be nice to people, and that's just how I grew up. And I'm just shocked, I guess. I knew that racism was out there, but to see it happen towards my husband, it just was super disappointing because I thought, even though I knew racism was still alive in the country, I just didn't think it was, I don't know, I just didn't think that people could be that narrow-minded. I don't know. I guess it just opened my eyes to even the smallest amount of racism and how that can extrapolate over the entire nation. And there have been a lot of these things that have come up in the recent past, and it's broken my heart, of course. But I think it always hits home a little bit more when it starts to happen with your loved ones. And so I was just really disappointed. You know, I felt bad for my husband because he's experienced a lot of racism throughout his life that, you know, I always feel bad for him when I hear those stories because I just never experienced it myself. And I was even more so disappointed because then what about my son? Like, what is he going to go through growing up? You know what I mean? Because he's half Asian. He looks half Asian, you know, and is he going to end up my husband actually almost took my last name because of the discrimination he experienced growing up. He had a hard time getting jobs because of his last name. His family actually made it a point to give him and his sisters American style names. And he was like, I'm just going to take your last name so that any children that we have won't have to go through what I went through. And I was like, yeah, but that's what made you stronger. That's what made you who you are today. It built a resilience within you. And that's just what we have to teach our kids. If, you know, at the time we didn't have kids, of course. So, you know, it's like if we have kids, we have to teach them to be resilient and to be proud of who they are. They're not defined by their last name or anything like that. They need to be resilient and be proud of everything about them.
Yeah. And I think, well, one, I remember when you're telling me this story about the haircut, right? I was just, we were on video chat, right? And I was just like, oh my God. Like, I was just like, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I felt like embarrassed, like I wasn't even there, but I was like feeling like embarrassed on behalf of somebody else. It's like, what in the world? Like, this is crazy. And I think that awareness of racism occurring around, like, we know it's there, but it just maybe is a little bit more distant until it happens to somebody
Right.
right? Especially if it's like really somebody It's not like your friend's friend, whoever, like, there's those degrees of separation. This is like literally like you're married to the person who is experiencing this thing, right? And that to me is just like wild. I mean, even recently in the news, I've seen stuff about elderly Asian people, in like California getting like hurt physically because someone's like pushing them over, like beating them up, like no reason. They're just like sitting there, like, or walking down the street or something, and like crazy stuff's happening to people, which like I don't understand because I mean in Hawaii, it's the reverse of everywhere else in the US where, Asian is the majority, and so I would say I've never grown up feeling racism towards me where I've lived because I've only lived here. But, I mean, I would definitely say I wasn't like oblivious to it. Like I knew it happened in other places, perhaps, thinking back on thoughts that I had, not that I was like racist to other people, but I definitely have like heard things said or like had certain vibes or feelings where maybe someone didn't necessarily, like someone else, but it wasn't like hateful. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like, it wasn't like angry. You know
Right.
what I mean? It was just kind of like, nah, just don't prefer it,
Hmm.
right? And so I've definitely like heard of those kinds of things, but I had never seen it. Like, I'm still to this day, I've never like witnessed in front of my face, like full on, racism happening. But I will say that for myself and, conversations that I've had with like friends and family about traveling to certain places, I'll definitely say, like let's say if I were going somewhere, let's say, Hawaii to New York City, right? There's probably some layovers here and there, right? And if like I was taking a flight that maybe had a layover in a place that was not very diverse, I'd think twice about taking that flight. I'd think twice about having to spend a few hours in a particular airport, not because I thought something was for sure going to happen to me, but if I could avoid it, I would.
Right.
right? If I could avoid, spending 5 hours, walking around an airport waiting for my next flight, thinking that someone might target me as like I'm going to steal from her or, whatever, anything like that, right? I would probably avoid it. Because it's like, if I can avoid it, why wouldn't I? Right? Like plus, I don't know because I mean I do know that, it's out there clearly, stuff that's happening now. We see it in the news, even like I feel like within the last couple of weeks, right? Right now we're like heading into the end of February for reference, but it's like I just don't want to put myself in a position where I may like be unsafe. So and maybe if I do have to have a layover in an airport like that, I just keep my stuff closer to me, and like be a little bit more aware of my surroundings. But it's like kind of sad, I think, that I have to even think that I have to do that. It's like, why can't I just go and be on my trip, right? Like, why can't I just go and be normal about whatever I have to do just to get to my final destination? I mean, I have heard stories from friends who are from here who went to colleges that maybe college campuses were not as diverse, and they've, experienced comments like, someone's like, why are you taking this like creative class, like artsy class? Shouldn't you be in math or
Oh
science,
my God.
because that's what that's what Asians do, right? Like that's what Asians are stereotyped to do. And I think, in some ways that could drive people to search for certain careers because we're thinking that's what we're supposed to be doing. So yeah, I've had friends who are taking like, creative classes and people would be like, wait, aren't you supposed to be in that math class over there? Like, why'd you sign up for this? It's kind of like, it's just school. Like, this is a thing I want to learn. Why does it even
None
matter?
of your
Like,
business.
um, yeah, just let me live my life. And, I think too, that was something that played into where I went to college, like even where I was applying. Like, I definitely think all the places I applied were a little bit more diverse, like had, Asians or a lot of Hawaii people who went to those colleges too, because then, at least maybe, I guess the thought is you be treated a little bit more fairly or something like that. But yeah, I would definitely say like something that I thought was kind of funny. I mean, to me it was funny. To other people it may not be funny. I thought it was funny. I had gone on a trip, a work trip to a city that, didn't have a lot of Asians or wasn't very diverse. And Chris and I had gone into like a Walgreens or something like that. And Chris, like some of his t-shirts have references to like, anime shows, some kind of like Asian cartoon, like something like that, like a joke or, whatever. And the cashier saw his shirt and somehow knew it was Japanese. I don't know, maybe this guy had like studied Japanese before. But when we paid, he told us like arigato. And I was just like, that could have gone so wrong. Like, how I like in my mind, I just thought it was funny, but I'm like, as a city that I had traveled to that I know did not have a lot of Asians, like here in Hawaii, I feel like more than anywhere else, we can tell if you're Japanese or Korean or Chinese or whatever. And I was like, whoa, like I can't imagine you see many Japanese people here, and that could have gone so wrong for you. Like we could have been like, whoa, what is he saying or whatever. But you got lucky, you got it right. You said the right thing. We're Japanese. Okay, we knew what you were saying.
That's so funny that you say that because growing up, I didn't have the culture that I have now because of meeting my husband. Growing up in a predominantly white demographic within my town, even though my neighbor was Asian, I couldn't tell you what nationality he was because I didn't ask. I didn't know to ask. I didn't necessarily go over there thinking like, oh my gosh, I need to know because these people are different from me. I liked hanging out over there. I liked hanging out with him and we were just kids hanging out. And I just didn't have enough wherewithal to say, maybe I should ask what their nationality is or who they are. And growing up, I never sought out that information because it wasn't something that was like in front of me to seek out. What you don't know, right? And so when I met my husband, it just completely opened my eyes to so many different cultures and so many different nationalities, in the Asian world, right? And so I learned so much. And he would challenge me. He would be like, so based on how they're speaking, do you know what language they're speaking? I'm like, oh yeah, it sounds like they're speaking Korean. He's like, exactly. And so and he would talk to his parents. One of his parents speaks Chinese, one of his parents speaks Vietnamese. And so he's like, see, can you tell the difference when because he'll be on the phone with his mom and then he'll switch over to his dad. He's like, could you tell when I switched over? And I was like, oh yeah, it sounded different. And then he would tell me, like, we would go out to eat here in Vegas when we were living here back in the day, and he'd be like, oh, that person's this nationality. Or he would like guess people's nationalities based on their facial features. Or when people came to visit from Hawaii, I remember one time we all went to dinner and nobody could guess this one server's nationality. The server kept saying no. And my husband goes, I know. And he said it. And she's like, yeah. So he's really good at picking out, facial features and the way people talk. He's really good at, deciphering what nationality somebody is. And I just never really had an opportunity to even think about that growing up, if that makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
so it did
Yeah.
open my eyes a lot. And I'm just like way more considerate about, how I act in front of people and what I do. I mean, I wasn't doing anything negative or wrong in the past, but it's good to know. It's important to know and be a little bit more cultured.
Yeah, so I think this is funny, and I don't think it's from a long time ago, and you can edit this out if you don't want me mentioning it. But I remember when we first met and we were working with each other, you'd be like mentioning some things that maybe were a part of, Daniel's culture, right? Like Vietnamese and stuff, and you're like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I'm Japanese." Like if you ask me Japanese stuff, like I can answer that for you, but I don't know what this Vietnamese stuff is.
I think my perspective was, because Hawaii is so diverse, that you get to know and learn about other people's cultures so much easier there than you would like where I grew up, that maybe you would have some insights because you growing up in Hawaii, you know a lot more about even Hawaiian language and
Mhm.
etiquette and things of that nature. And some Asian cultures have similar etiquette.
Right. Or even like I probably had some friend I was growing up with or something like that. But too, actually, I was thinking about this recently and I didn't actually know a lot of Vietnamese kids growing up.
Me neither.
So that's probably why I didn't know, but
But I was asking you because
um,
I thought you might be Vietnamese. I was asking you because maybe you had more insight. Every time I ask
no,
somebody,
I know you didn't think I was Vietnamese, but I was just like, I have no idea. That's a little specific. I have no idea what that is.
oh, that's so funny. But it's so funny too because when I would go to grab food in Hawaii, they would always give me forks, and I would feel so slighted.
Hmm. But I can't use the chopsticks. What's going on? It's okay. Some Asians can't use chopsticks. My grandpa couldn't use a
I could use
chopstick.
chopsticks before I met my husband. He was like surprised. Not as good as I can use them now, but I could eat a full meal with my chopsticks, but it was a little clunky. Now it's like I could straight up I could straight
On
up
point.
like cut up some food with my chopsticks.
I feel like eating with chopsticks is easier than eating with a fork for me. And depending on, not fried rice though, that's hard. Or like, or like corn or something like that. That's not something you want to do with
Right. But
chopsticks, but
when
most
you're
other
eating
things,
like certain foods, it feels right to use chopsticks. Like I don't know, I can't articulate the feeling.
like
No.
salad. Then you don't have like this whole giant thing of like lettuce on your fork because when you use a fork, it just like
Yeah,
grabs
that's
way too
true.
much. I like to eat it
But
leaf
like
by leaf.
sushi, for instance, or noodles, like
Yeah,
to me, those things, certain types of dishes, I I feel like I would, yeah,
it
and I
makes
would
more
feel a little bit
sense.
awkward using a fork now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, you know what I was thinking about? Like one time I had like a sort of experience. I wouldn't even have called this racism. Like it wasn't. It was more like confusion. So I remember I had gone on this trip to LA somewhere and we had gone to like this outlet store and I was shopping around and I had gone into the Disney store because, a lot of my friends have kids and I had wanted to like pick up something small for them to bring back. This was like, I don't know, 5-ish years ago. And so I was looking around and this woman who was next to me, like also searching, she started to speak to me in
Oh, that's
Spanish.
great.
And I got so confused. I was like, uh, and I told her, I don't know what you're saying. Like I basically said, like, sorry, I don't understand you. And she looked at me all disappointed, like I was the person who's actually supposed to be speaking Spanish. And but oh, this girl, she doesn't know how to speak her own language. I was thinking, like, I'm Asian. I don't even know why you're holding this against me. But okay.
Oh my God. That's happened to me before, but I look like I could speak Spanish more than you look like you could speak Spanish. Like, that was a misjudgment on her part for sure.
I was like, I'm clearly Asian. I don't even know what else I look like, honestly. But like I did have some friends who maybe around college or shortly after moved to the mainland for work. They had gotten a job. They're moving there, and I remember having a discussion where we felt like we don't know if this is true or not. Obviously, we didn't take an official poll and ask people their thoughts, but we felt like if so, I mean, okay, so in Hawaii, there's a lot of mixing, right? There's a lot of people who are half white, half Asian, two different kinds of Asians, more different types of everything, like 10 different nationalities, right? And we kind of felt like if those people like went to the mainland and someone you came into contact with wasn't, familiar with like the mixing of cultures to
Mhm.
like that degree, and if they couldn't fully pinpoint what you could be, whether that be Asian or if you're like mixed, like really mixed, or like white and Asian or something like that, they would automatically bucket you into like Mexican if they couldn't figure out who you were because you kind of had like dark features, right? Like if your hair was a little bit darker, um, and skin tone I feel like varies, right? Like you could be a little bit more fair, a little bit more dark. Because I did have, some friends at the time who were like four different ethnicities. They had four different backgrounds. And they kind of came into contact with people who thought that, they're speaking Spanish to them and stuff like that when they were like half Asian, part Hawaiian, and a little bit of white, like all that kind of stuff. They're like, none of this is Spanish. Like none of this means I
Yeah.
speak Spanish, right? And we kind of because we were there as a group, a bunch of like mixed individuals, and I was like, I could kind of see how someone might mistake you that way if they just didn't
That's
know,
funny. I
you
just watched a
know.
movie in Hawaii,
And
Finding Ohana on Netflix, and she, the family had moved to New York from Hawaii, and the girl was like, I was tired of being mistaken for, I don't remember what Latinx like nationality she was, but or they thought that she was, but she's like, I was tired of being mistaken for that, so I just learned Spanish so I could just, you know, so she was fluent in Spanish. She could read it and speak it. I'm not sure she could write it, but like she just went with it. I was like, okay, that's interesting. But
that's a lot of work you're putting
right.
into
But
that,
in
right?
certain areas of the mainland, you get two options in terms of the other language that you get taught, and it's either French or Spanish. But in Hawaii, what are the two languages or whatever number of languages are you guys offered growing up? Do you remember?
Well, I would say like, so let's say if we're talking like high school or something like that, I think it was like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, French, Spanish. I mean, there was a lot Latin. We had
Mm,
Latin at my high school. So you could have picked like maybe
right.
7 different things, plus like, I mean, I can't really say Chinese because there's like Mandarin, Cantonese, right? There's like different kinds of Chinese. So, um, yeah, I feel like, there were a lot of options. I mean, even Hawaiian too. I mean, depending on what school you go to, if that might be available. I remember like all of us when we were in elementary school, I feel like all elementary schools did this, but they taught you like how to count, like colors and like names of animals, like some pretty basic stuff, like in Hawaiian too. So yeah, availability of language courses, I would say, are maybe like more
Yeah,
abundant here. And I mean, it's kind of funny because here you probably wouldn't choose the Spanish,
because it doesn't make
Italian,
sense, right?
French
Like, how is that going to help you if
options,
you end up staying on the islands?
Right, and getting a job. And back then, I mean, maybe not 2020 and going into 2021, but the hotel industry, the
Yep.
tourism industry, and where are these tourists coming from? A lot of them are coming from Asia. So, if you back then had looked at job postings to work at some of these hotels, they'd have a little note on the side, mentioning that they really wanted like a Japanese, Korean, or
Right.
Chinese speaker. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whereas where I grew up, predominantly, you have folks that spoke Spanish outside of Hali
Mhm.
people.
I feel like maybe the East Coast
Yeah.
is maybe more
Yeah.
French.
I grew up more on the West Coast,
Yeah.
so it
Hmm.
was, it made more.
Or maybe northern, like near
Oh yeah,
Canada, because there's
right.
like
Yeah.
French
Yeah.
Canada too, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took four years of Spanish altogether, two in high school and then two in college. So I can pick things out and figure out what people are talking about, but I don't feel comfortable speaking it. But even in Hawaii, I went to a like Mexican eatery and the guy started speaking Spanish to me and I was like, "Oh, I feel at home. Like, thanks." Like, well, even though I'm not Latinx or Latina, whatever it's called, I was like, "Okay, hola, come on."
Yeah. Japanese is so hard. I've literally taken Japanese for like 15 years, still can't speak it fluently. It's like something you have to really like be doing all the time. My grandma's the only one at this point who can understand, speak, and read Japanese, but I mean, her English is just as good as her
Yeah.
Japanese anyway.
Daniel
So,
speaks,
yeah.
he doesn't speak like fluid sentences in Japanese, but because he was working in the restaurant industry for so long in Hawaii and even here, yeah, he picked up
You
on
pick
it.
up
And
on
so
it.
he was able to joke around with tourists in Japanese and they would be laughing. They thought he was like the best person in the whole world. They just thought he was the best because he could like joke around with them and they felt a little bit more like not separated from home.
Oh, actually, you know what's funny? Okay, so like this is kind of going back to sort of like racism experiences. Again, this is not a racist experience. I would
Okay.
not call this racism, but when I go to Waikiki, people
Oh
think
yeah,
I'm a
that's right.
tourist. People think I'm a Japanese tourist, will greet me in Japanese, talk to me in Japanese, and I just look at them like, I don't even know what you're saying. And then I'll talk to them in English and they look like, whoo, so embarrassed, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, I live here. I didn't just travel here for fun right now. But I think it's just funny. I feel like, even because I feel like, the people who are doing that to me, their first language is Japanese. And I can tell that based on how they're speaking the Japanese part and how they sound when they speak English. It sounds like they're
Oh.
struggling with English. And so I think it's like funny because to them, I look like a native Japanese person. Maybe I'm a little more tan, but that's about it, and
Right.
I'm not even that dark, but yeah.
That's funny. But at least, they're being nice to you. So it's like, okay, that's where
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's folks who maybe Japanese isn't their native language and they're actually trying. It's commendable to make somebody feel more comfortable where they are, because when we went to Japan,
Hmm.
I felt way out of my element. Luckily, a lot of things in Japan are translated to English, and I think that's really great. But I mean, not everywhere, but in the main cities, right? Yeah,
In main
so
areas,
that
yeah.
was super helpful. But I just think it's going the extra mile is really nice, especially like if you're in a touristy area and you know that the tourists coming in speak certain languages. Why not? Why not learn a little bit and make them feel more at home and comfortable? But I think the whole point of this conversation was just, it was shocking what had happened to my husband, and it was very disappointing. And I just hope that as a nation, we can come together and be nicer to one another and just be more inclusive of the people around us so that all of our children can grow up feeling included, feeling like they're a part of something, and not feeling like they need to be worried about going to a certain airport. Like I never had to worry about that. And when you brought that up earlier in this conversation, I was like, well, maybe I do need to be a little bit more cautious about that for my family. And it's just
Mhm.
it's sad, and I hope that as a nation we can get better. That's all. Well, that's it for us. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Outright Effect. You can find us at theoutrighteffect.com. Follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all at The Outright Effect. You can also reach out by emailing us at theoutrighteffect@gmail.com. See you guys next time.